You've seen this pattern before. You explain something clearly, carefully, logically. You even slow down so no one feels left behind. And nothing happens. People nod, they agree, they move on. Then they follow someone else, someone louder, simpler, more certain, even when that person is wrong. Later, you watch the consequences unfold exactly as you predicted. And still, no one connects it back to what you said. At some point, a quiet thought appears. If being right matters so much, why does it never seem to win? This isn't about intelligence in the abstract. It's not about IQ tests or books or education. It's about something you feel in real situations. Meetings where the most confident voice dominates, not the most accurate one. Arguments where certainty crushes nuance. Decisions made by people who don't understand the problem, but sound like they do. You start noticing a strange imbalance. The people who think the most hesitate. The people who understand complexity speak carefully. And the people who know the least speak with absolute certainty. And somehow they're the ones others follow. At first you assume it's temporary. You think clarity will eventually rise. That truth will assert itself. That intelligence will be recognized. But it keeps happening. Different place, this same outcome. The confident are elevated. The intelligent are ignored. And slowly frustration turns inward. You start asking the wrong question. What am I doing wrong? You try explaining better. You add more detail, more evidence, more logic, and the result gets worse. People don't lean in, they pull away. Because the problem was never your explanation. The problem is that the world does not reward intelligence the way you were taught it would. It responds to signals, not depth, not accuracy, not truth. Signals. And one signal matters more than all the others combined. Confidence. Not real confidence, not competence, not understanding, but the appearance of certainty. Once you see this clearly, something unsettling becomes impossible to ignore. The real world isn't structured to discover who is right. It's structured to follow who feels strongest. And this isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system, but why? Why does confidence overpower intelligence so consistently? Why does sounding sure matter more than being correct? And why do intelligent people keep losing games they don't even realize they're playing? That question changes everything. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Here's the first uncomfortable shift you have to make. The world is not designed to reward understanding. It's designed to respond quickly. Most people are not evaluating ideas. They're scanning for signals that help them decide who to follow, without thinking too much. Depth takes effort. Certainty doesn't. When someone speaks with confidence, the listener feels relief. They don't have to analyze. They don't have to doubt. They don't have to take responsibility for thinking it through themselves. Confidence makes decisions feel safe. Intelligence does the opposite. It introduces complexity. It highlights uncertainty. It forces people to confront the fact that the situation is harder than they want it to be. And that creates discomfort. So even when an intelligent person is right, their presence creates friction. They slow things down. They complicate the narrative. They expose gaps. Meanwhile, the confident person simplifies everything. They don't say, it depends. They say, this is how it is. They don't hesitate. They don't qualify. They don't show doubt. And to a world optimized for speed and emotional comfort, that feels like strength. This is where the first illusion breaks. You were taught that intelligence naturally rises because it's useful. But usefulness is not the same as a dominance. In social systems, what spreads is not what's correct. It's what's easy to accept. Certainty spreads faster than accuracy. Confidence travels farther than truth. That's why the same pattern repeats in every environment, at work, in politics, in relationships, online. The people who speak in absolutes gain influence. The people who think in nuances lose attention, not because nuance is wrong, but because it demands too much from the audience. And here's the part most intelligent people resist accepting. This isn't about stupidity versus intelligence. It's about cognitive economy. People conserve mental energy the way water finds the easiest path downhill. They choose the voice that lets them stop thinking. Once you understand this, another realization starts to surface. The confident person doesn't need to defeat intelligence. They only need to outperform it socially. And social performance follows a completely different set of rules. Rules that intelligence alone does not satisfy. This is the crack in the worldview most intelligent people never see. They keep playing a truth game in a system optimized for signals. And until you recognize that mismatch, you will keep losing without understanding why. But this still doesn't explain who benefits from this structure. Because someone figured this out long before you did. And he didn't complain about it. He used it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start watching how decisions are actually made. In meetings, the outcome is rarely decided by the person who understands the issue best. It's decided by the person who speaks first, speaks longest, and never hesitates. They don't ask careful questions. They don't explore edge cases. They don't pause to think. They state conclusions. And everyone else adjusts around them. Not because they're convinced, but because certainty creates momentum. You notice it in arguments too. The person who shouts less but thinks more loses ground. Their pauses are read as weakness. Their nuance is mistaken for confusion. Meanwhile, the confident speaker interrupts, reframes, simplifies. They reduce complexity into slogans, and the room follows them. Not because the logic is better, but because it feels decisive. You see it online. The most shared opinions are rarely the most accurate. They're the cleanest, the most emotionally certain, the least ambiguous. Posts that say it's complicated disappear. Posts that say this is the truth spread. Reality doesn't reward the careful. It amplifies the assertive. And then there's hierarchy. Watch who rises. It's not the person who sees 10 moves ahead. It's the person who looks like they already know where the game is going. People don't follow understanding. They follow perceived direction. Because direction removes uncertainty. And uncertainty is what most people are trying to escape. This is where another uncomfortable realization lands. Intelligent people often sabotage themselves without realizing it. They hesitate because they're thinking. They soften statements because they see exceptions. They avoid absolutes because they respect truth. But socially, all of that reads as instability. The world doesn't interpret caution as wisdom. It interprets it as lack of authority. So the person who knows less but projects finality ends up leading. And the person who knows more but reveals complexity ends up sidelined. This isn't rare, it's constant. And it's not personal, it's structural. Social systems don't measure what's inside your mind. They respond to what's visible on the surface. Tone, posture, speed, certainty. Those are the currencies being exchanged. And if you keep assuming the system values what you value, you'll keep misreading what's happening in front of you. Because this imbalance isn't accidental, it's been understood for centuries by people who were far less idealistic and far more effective. And this is where a certain name enters the picture. Machiavelli noticed this long before modern psychology gave it names. He didn't observe people as they should behave. He watched them as they actually behave when power is at stake. And what he saw was simple. Most people do not follow truth. They follow its appearance. They don't measure competence directly. They infer it from signals: strength, decisiveness, confidence. To Machiavelli, this wasn't corruption, it was mechanics. He understood that in any social system, people cannot afford to analyze everything, so they rely on shortcuts. Who looks certain? Who seems in control? Who doesn't hesitate? That person becomes the reference point. Machiavelli wrote that people judge far more by the eye than by the hand, by what they see, not by what actually is. Because seeing is easy, understanding is not. This is where many intelligent people misunderstand him. They assume Machiavelli promoted deception, that he celebrated manipulation. He didn't. He accepted perception as a force that cannot be ignored. If people respond to appearance, then appearance becomes power. Not because it's morally right, but because it works. Machiavelli understood something deeply uncomfortable. A correct idea without authority is fragile. A wrong idea wrapped in confidence is resilient. Reality doesn't move through logic alone. It moves through belief. And belief forms long before evidence is considered. That's why Machiavelli warned that appearing indecisive is more dangerous than being wrong. Indecision signals weakness. Weakness invites challenge. And once challenged, truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is who holds the psychological high ground. The intelligent mind wants fairness. It wants merit to win. Machiavelli wasn't interested in fairness. He was interested in outcomes. He saw that power flows toward those who look like they deserve it, not those who actually do. And instead of resisting this, he learned how to operate within it. That's the shift most intelligent people never make. They keep asking, why doesn't intelligence win? Machiavelli asked a different question. Given how people really are, how do you position yourself so you're not ignored? That question doesn't feel noble, but it's the one that actually changes results. And once you accept that, the entire game looks different, because confidence is no longer a personality trait. It's a signal, and signals are how power moves. Confidence works not because it proves anything, but because it prevents questions. When someone speaks with certainty, the listener subconsciously assumes the thinking has already been done. The work feels complete. There's nothing left to resolve. That's the real function of confidence. It closes loops. Intelligence opens them. An intelligent person says, here's what we know so far. A confident person says, here's how it is. One invites analysis, the other invites alignment. And alignment is what social systems crave. Most people don't want to understand a situation. They want to know where to stand. Confidence gives them that instantly. It offers psychological orientation: up, down, right, wrong, us, them. No effort required. This is why confidence spreads even when it's empty. It reduces cognitive load. Instead of thinking, people mirror. Instead of evaluating, they follow. Not because they're foolish, but because the brain is efficient. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He knew that authority doesn't emerge from depth, it emerges from closure. The person who sounds finished becomes the anchor. Everyone else orbits around them. And once that anchor is set, evidence struggles to dislodge it. This is why facts often arrive too late. By the time intelligence finishes analyzing, confidence has already claimed the territory. That's also why intelligent people feel like they're always catching up socially. They're playing a slower game in a faster arena. They want precision. The system wants direction, and direction doesn't care about being correct. It cares about being clear. Here's the uncomfortable part. Confidence doesn't need truth to function. It only needs consistency. Repeat something with enough certainty, and it becomes familiar. Familiarity becomes trust. Trust becomes authority. Truth, on the other hand, often changes as understanding deepens. It refines itself, it corrects itself, which makes it look unstable to people who mistake certainty for strength. So the signal wins, not because it's better, but because it's easier to process. And once you recognize confidence as a signal, not a virtue, something shifts. You stop moralizing the outcome. You stop being confused by it. You begin to see the system for what it is, a mechanism that rewards whatever reduces friction. And confidence, more than intelligence, does exactly that. But this creates a deeper problem, because the very traits that make intelligence valuable, doubt, caution, nuance, are the same traits that weaken it in public. And that's where intelligent people start losing for real. Intelligence carries a built-in disadvantage in social environments, not because it's weak, but because it's honest. An intelligent mind sees layers, contradictions, trade-offs. It recognizes that most answers are provisional. That certainty is often unjustified. That reality resists clean conclusions. So it hesitates. It qualifies statements. It leaves room for revision. It says, I could be wrong. And internally, that's strength. But publicly, it's interpreted very differently. Hesitation looks like doubt. Nuance looks like confusion. Self-correction looks like instability. Social systems don't reward epistemic integrity. They reward decisiveness. This is where intelligence starts losing ground. Not because it lacks substance, but because it refuses to perform certainty it doesn't possess. Meanwhile, the less intelligent mind experiences no such friction. It doesn't see layers, so it doesn't hesitate. It doesn't perceive contradictions, so it feels no tension. It doesn't imagine alternatives, so it speaks in absolutes. And those absolutes feel powerful. They create a sense of closure, a sense of finality. People mistake that feeling for authority. This is why intelligence often self-sabotages in public. The intelligent person is playing a truth-seeking game. The environment is running a dominance signaling game. And the rules are incompatible. You see it when intelligent people over-explain. They add context to prevent misunderstanding. They offer caveats to stay accurate. But every added sentence weakens the signal. Because the audience isn't tracking precision. They're tracking confidence. So the person who compresses complexity into a bold statement wins attention even if that compression destroys the truth. This creates a painful loop. The smarter you are, the more you see what could go wrong, the more you see what's missing, the harder it becomes to speak with unjustified certainty. And the more cautious you become, the more invisible you grow. Not because intelligence has failed, but because it's operating in a system that doesn't measure it. Public spaces don't evaluate who is right. They evaluate who appears settled. And intelligence by nature is rarely settled. This is why so many intelligent people feel unheard. They assume the system is broken. But the system is working exactly as designed, just not in their favor. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep paying a cost you don't even realize you're paying. Here's the part most intelligent people resist accepting. If you're consistently ignored, talked over, or sidelined, it's not because your ideas lack value. It's because value is not what's being measured. Social environments don't reward insight. They reward position. And position is established before ideas are even heard. This is the uncomfortable truth. When you speak, people aren't evaluating what you're saying first. They're evaluating where you stand in the hierarchy. Are you certain or tentative? Are you asserting or offering? Are you framing or responding? Those signals are processed instantly, long before logic enters the picture. So when an intelligent person presents a careful argument, the audience has often already decided how much weight it deserves. not based on accuracy, based on posture. This is why explaining more rarely helps. More explanation doesn't raise your position, it lowers it. Because explanation implies the need for validation, and the need for validation signals lower status. The confident speaker doesn't ask to be understood. They assume understanding will follow. And that assumption alone changes how people listen. This is where most intelligent people break. They double down on clarity. They try to educate. They try to bring others up to speed. But every attempt pushes them further into the role of the one seeking approval. Meanwhile, the confident person remains untouched. They don't defend, they don't justify, they don't refine, they move on, and the group moves with them. This isn't fair, but it's consistent, and consistency matters more than fairness in social systems. The painful realization is this: you can be right and still lose influence. You can understand deeply and still be dismissed. You can see further and still be sidelined. Not because intelligence failed, but because it was never the deciding factor. And once this clicks, another question becomes impossible to avoid. If explanation weakens position and confidence strengthens it, then what are intelligent people actually supposed to do? Because continuing the same approach only leads to one outcome: more frustration, more invisibility, more wasted energy. This is the point where you either keep fighting the system, or you finally learn how to operate within it. And Nietzsche understood something most people refuse to look at. Power does not argue. Power does not explain. Power asserts. The moment you feel the need to justify yourself, the hierarchy is already set. One position is above. The other is responding. Nietzsche saw explanation as a symptom, not a tool. Those who hold power do not persuade through logic. They shape reality through presence. They speak as if their view is already the ground everyone stands on. This is why power feels irrational to intelligent people. They assume influence comes from better reasons. But Nietzsche saw that influence comes from force of expression, not violence, not coercion, psychological gravity, the ability to make others orient themselves around you. That's why Nietzsche criticized the moralization of weakness, when intelligence hides behind politeness, when insight waits for permission, when clarity softens itself to avoid offense. Power moves elsewhere, not because power hates intelligence, but because intelligence refuses to occupy space. Nietzsche didn't tell people to become louder. He told them to become mere unchallengeable, to speak from a position that doesn't ask to be validated. In social systems, the person who defines the frame controls the conversation. Everyone else reacts inside it. This is the subtext its most intelligent people miss. They focus on content. Power operates through context. Who sets the terms? Who moves first? Who refuses to negotiate their position? Nietzsche understood that the world does not reward truth that waits to be invited. It rewards forceful clarity, not clarity born of certainty, but clarity born of commitment. Once you commit to a position, others adjust around it. Once you hesitate, they move past you. This isn't about ego. It's about recognizing that silence, delay, and excessive justification are read as submission in systems driven by dominant signals. And until intelligent people confront that reality, they will keep confusing insight with influence. They'll keep wondering why brilliance feels powerless. Because intelligence without presence doesn't lead. It observes. An observation alone never moves the world. Facts feel solid, reliable, grounded. So intelligent people assume they should win, but facts don't move on their own. They require effort to process, context to interpret, and patience to absorb. Confidence requires none of that. It hits immediately. This is why facts struggle in open environments. A fact asks the listener to slow down, to evaluate, to compare, to think. Confidence asks only one thing: acceptance. And in a world overloaded with information, acceptance is far more valuable than understanding. Most people don't reject facts because they're false. They reject them because they're expensive. Mentally expensive, emotionally expensive. A fact might force someone to reconsider a belief, to admit uncertainty, to face discomfort. Confidence offers relief. It says you don't need to rethink anything. This is already settled. That's why facts arrive late and leave early. By the time intelligence finishes building a case, confidence has already shaped the narrative. Once a narrative forms, facts are no longer evaluated on their merit. They're filtered through identity. Does this fact support what I already believe? Does it threaten my position? Does it disturb my sense of certainty? If it does, it's rejected, not debated. This is why intelligent people feel like they're always explaining after the fact. They bring evidence to a conclusion that's already been emotionally chosen. And once emotion locks in, logic becomes irrelevant. The uncomfortable truth is this: facts don't compete with confidence on equal ground. They're playing different games. Facts operate in environments that value truth. Confidence thrives in environments that value stability. And most social spaces prioritize stability. People want to feel oriented, not corrected. They want coherence, not accuracy. So confidence dominates. Not because it's stronger, but because it satisfies the deeper need. The need to stop thinking. This is why repeating facts louder doesn't work. This is why adding more data fails. This is why intelligence exhausts itself trying to catch up, because it's still assuming the contest is about truth. It isn't. It's about who controls the emotional ground. And until you see that, facts will keep losing to something that shouldn't beat them, but does, relentlessly. Which leads to the only question that matters now. If truth isn't enough, what is the intelligent move? Because continuing as you are guarantees one thing: you'll stay right and remain irrelevant. This is the moment where most intelligent people make a fatal mistake. They assume the answer is to become less intelligent, to simplify their thinking, to abandon depth. That's not the move. The real shift isn't about lowering your standards. It's about changing the layer you operate on. Intelligence doesn't lose because it's weak. It loses because it's deployed incorrectly. You've been using insight as if the environment were neutral, as if ideas float freely and the best ones naturally rise. But social systems aren't neutral. They're structured. They respond to framing before content, position before precision, signals before substance. So the intelligent move is not to argue harder. It's to stop competing where intelligence is invisible. This is where strategy enters. Instead of asking, how do I explain this better? You start asking, from what position am I speaking? Instead of adding nuance, you establish ground. Instead of inviting debate, you define the terms. Not aggressively, not emotionally, structurally. You stop leading with evidence. You lead with orientation. You give people a place to stand before you give them information. Because without orientation, information has nowhere to land. This is the part that feels unnatural to intelligent people. It feels dishonest. It feels theatrical. It feels like compromise. But it isn't. It's translation. You're not changing what you think. You're changing how reality receives it. The confident speaker isn't powerful because they're shallow. They're powerful because they speak in a language the system understands. And once you accept that, you stop resenting confidence. You start using structure. Like, you separate truth from delivery. Depth stays intact. But it's no longer exposed first. This is the shift from reaction to control, from explanation to positioning, from being correct to being effective. And once you make that shift, something unexpected happens. You stop feeling frustrated because you're no longer fighting the wrong battle. You're playing the right game, on the right level, with the right tools. And now there's one final distinction you need to see. Because intelligence doesn't disappear in this process. It becomes selective. And that's where real leverage begins. Once you accept how the system actually works, a quiet distinction becomes obvious. There are two languages operating at the same time. Most people only ever learn one. The first language is form. It's fast, compressed, decisive. It doesn't explain, it declares. This is the language of confidence, authority, and direction. It tells people where to stand without asking them to think. The second language is depth. It's slow, precise, conditional. It explores, it refines, it corrects itself. This is the language of intelligence. The mistake intelligent people make is assuming these languages compete. They don't. They serve different audiences. Depth is not for the majority, not because the majority is bad or inferior, but because depth demands effort most people are unwilling to give. Form is what allows movement at scale, so the strategic individual learns to separate them. Form outward, depth inward. You don't abandon nuance. You contain it. You don't explain everything you know. You decide what needs to be seen. This isn't about manipulation. It's about respecting reality. When you speak to everyone as if they are capable of depth, you dilute yourself and exhaust them. When you speak only in form, you hollow yourself out, so you split the channel. With most people, you speak in orientation, not exploration. You give conclusions, not the full process. You offer clarity, not the entire map. With the few who can think, you go deep. You open loops. You question assumptions. Those conversations are rare, and that's why they're valuable. This is where intelligent people regain control. They stop trying to be understood by everyone. They stop oversharing insight. They stop paying the cost of unnecessary explanation. They become selective, and selectivity changes everything because once you stop leaking depth into spaces that can't hold it, your intelligence stops working against you. It becomes a resource again. One you deploy deliberately, one you protect, and one you finally use where it actually matters. But there's still one obstacle left. Because even with the right language, most people still won't follow truth. They'll follow something else. And understanding that completes the picture. At a certain point, explanation stops working altogether. Not because it's unclear, but because people aren't listening for understanding. They're listening for permission. Permission to follow, permission to align, permission to stop thinking. Authority provides that permission instantly. It doesn't argue its case, it occupies a position. Once authority is perceived, explanation becomes unnecessary and often counterproductive. Because explaining implies negotiation, and negotiation implies equality. Authority doesn't negotiate. It sets the tone, the pace, the direction. This is why the same idea sounds convincing from one person and ignorable from another. The content didn't change. The position did. People don't follow arguments, they follow orientation. They want to know who leads, who decides, who is certain enough to carry the weight of choice. Authority answers those questions without words. This is why intelligent people struggle when they rely on logic alone. Logic asks to be evaluated, authority asks to be accepted, and acceptance is easier. Most people would rather follow a wrong direction confidently than face the anxiety of choosing correctly on their own. This isn't stupidity, it's avoidance. Avoidance of responsibility. Authority absorbs that burden. That's why it spreads faster than truth. Once someone is seen as an authority, their mistakes are forgiven. Their contradictions are ignored. Their certainty overrides evidence. Meanwhile, the intelligent explainer is still waiting to be heard, still building cases, still refining arguments. But by then, the decision has already been made, not intellectually, socially. This is the turning point most intelligent people miss. They keep trying to convince when the system has already chosen who to follow. And until you stop confusing explanation with influence, you'll keep investing energy in a channel that's already closed. Authority doesn't emerge from being right, it emerges from being positioned. And once you understand that, the final shift becomes unavoidable, because authority doesn't require deception. It requires alignment with how people actually decide. And that realization changes how you move through the world from this point forward. Once you see this clearly, something unexpected happens. You stop being confused by people. Their decisions no longer feel irrational. Their choices stop surprising you. Their behavior becomes predictable. You understand why they follow confidence over competence, why they repeat simple ideas instead of accurate ones, why they resist correction but submit to authority, and that understanding gives you an edge. While others react emotionally, you anticipate. While they argue, you position. While they waste energy trying to be understood by everyone, you decide who actually matters. This is where intelligence stops being a liability, because you're no longer using it to prove things, you're using it to read the system. You see when explanation will fail before you open your mouth. You see when silence is stronger than argument. You see when a firm statement will carry more weight than 10 facts. You stop taking resistance personally. You understand it's not about truth. It's about comfort, identity, and hierarchy. And once you understand that, you stop fighting ghosts. You don't waste clarity on closed minds. You don't pour depth into shallow containers. You don't argue with people who need certainty more than accuracy. This creates a strange calm, not arrogance, not detachment, precision. You choose your battles, you choose your words, you choose your audience. And because you're no longer bleeding energy, your presence sharpens. You speak less. But when you do, it lands. You don't chase agreement, you establish orientation. This is the quiet advantage most people never develop. They're still trapped inside the emotional noise of the system. You're operating above it, not by dominating others, but by refusing to be pulled into games that don't reward intelligence. And once you reach this point, there's only one thing left to resolve. Not how to win, but how to live with this knowledge without becoming bitter, isolated, or rigid. Because clarity without balance can turn into its own trap. And that's where everything finally comes together. Here's the part that brings everything into focus. The world is not broken. It's not unfair in the way you were taught to believe. It's simply not organized around intelligence. It's organized around momentum, certainty, and social gravity. Once you accept that, something loosens inside you. You stop trying to correct everyone. You stop expecting recognition for depth. You stop confusing being right with being effective. Not because intelligence doesn't matter, but because it matters selectively. You don't owe your insight to the crowd. You don't need to prove your understanding. You don't have to exhaust yourself, explaining what others can't receive. You learn to move differently, You speak with clarity, not over justification. You hold your ground without dramatizing it. You let certainty, do its work without pretending it's truth itself. And when depth is needed, you reserve it for the few who can actually meet you there. This isn't cynicism, it's alignment. Alignment with how people decide. Alignment with how power flows. Alignment with how influence actually works. Machiavelli understood this. Nietzsche understood it. Not because they were cruel, but because they refused to lie to themselves about human nature. They didn't waste their lives fighting the structure of reality. They learned how to operate within it. And that's the choice in front of you. You can keep expecting intelligence to be rewarded everywhere and suffer constant friction. Or you can accept the world as it is, adjust your strategy, and finally move without resistance. Confidence will continue to beat intelligence in the open. That will not change. What can change is whether intelligence keeps losing because it refuses to adapt. This isn't about becoming louder. It's about becoming deliberate, seeing clearly, speaking precisely, and placing your intelligence where it actually produces results. Not everywhere, but exactly where it matters.